Welcome, April 12th. Can you believe it's spring? This is very exciting. Hopefully people have stayed healthy at home and here. I'm Lauren Kinghorn. So now I am ready to introduce our demonstrator, Gwen Chasen. If you want to come on up. So this is Gwen, and she started out in corporate world and was a secret artist. And now she is a full-fledged artist out in the open. Hooray for being true to yourself and having the privilege to do that. Yes. Tonight she's going to give a representational watercolor on Yupo. Gwen studied other things besides watercolor, right? Pottery, wheel throwing, drawing, painting, crafts, sewing, printing. She just did a woodcut class in Cambridge, and she's done classes in Concord art. But now you pretty much watercolor is your primary medium, would you say? And you teach workshops on a variety of creative painting techniques in surrounding towns. So go to gwenchasen.com, little plug, for more information. If you want to take some classes, if you really enjoyed tonight, please let us know. And you can take it away.
Hi everybody. Yeah, I love Yupo, and first of all, I want to say how grateful I am to you for asking me to do this demo, because honestly, this past 2.5 years have just knocked the wind out of my art sails. I have to say, I've not been painting very much or doing very much on the creative side. So it was really a treat to have this goal to kind of work toward and get ready for this demo. I first learned about Yupo, oh gosh, it must be about 15 years ago. I took a workshop in Cape Cod at the Cape Cod Art Center with the wonderful Elizabeth Pratt, who is no longer with us, but she was a phenomenal Yupo painter, very loose and very creative. So my degree is in math, right? So I like to do really, really detailed things, and I want it to be right, really right. And I was hoping at some point to find a way to free myself from that need to be so tight. And Yupo just opened the doors to a loose creative style for me. And Elizabeth, that wonderful teacher, Elizabeth Pratt. So I had only been painting in watercolor at that point, and that's what we did in this class. And we did a variety of abstract paintings, which I had never done before. And this is actually, there's one on the table, that big abstract came out of that class. So no one was more surprised than I. And I just continued working in Yupo quite a bit. For me, it became a way of painting in a very loose way. And also it's like a meditation, and I'll talk more about that in a little while. But to start, I have some pieces. Yupo is a polypropylene paper. It's not paper at all, it's plastic. So they try to convince us that it's environmentally friendly because it's not chopping down trees. Of course, it is making plastic, but we won't talk about that. So it's been in use since the 50s for packaging materials, making boxes and marketing stuff. And it's only more recently, I think in the 70s or 80s even, that artists got hold of it. And of course, once we get hold of the material, we just paint all over it, right? So I have here a sampler of 4 different weights of, am I bothering this by touching it? Is that okay? Okay, 4 different weights of Yupo. It's very, very slippery. The paint does not adhere to it. It just floats on the surface, and you wait for it to evaporate, basically. And that gives you a tremendous opportunity to float colors into each other in a really interesting and beautiful way, in serendipitous way. It's happy accidents all over the place. So I have the lightweight Yupo, the medium weight, and the heavyweight, which is quite stiff. And then there's a vellum that you can sort of kind of see through, and that has more tooth, so the paint sticks to it more. So I'm just going to pass these around for you to feel. Don't worry about getting your hands on them. When you are actually painting on Yupo, you have to be careful not to handle it because the oils in your fingers will leave residue and the paint will not adhere to it. So you do a nice swath of paint and there's your fingerprints, sitting on the paper. So I'm going to, in today's demo, I'm going to use this lovely big sheet. And I've already washed it just with a little bit of water and paper towel to kind of clean off any stuff that's sitting on the surface. If it gets really dirty, you can wash it with soapy water. Just want to turn off the sound on my phone. All right. So what are the materials to use with Yupo? I'm going to focus mostly on Yupo, and the demo will be in watercolor. I hope that's okay with all of you. So you can paint on Yupo with anything: oils, acrylics, watercolors, and alcohol inks. And I've actually brought some alcohol inks today. Have any of you worked in alcohol inks? Oh, they're really fun. I've done a big series of tiles, ceramic tiles with alcohol ink. It's crazy stuff, really crazy. And that's a wonderful thing to do along with watercolor because the water and the alcohol kind of reject each other. So you put down watercolor and you drip a little alcohol ink in and boom, things happen. So I'll demonstrate that. Yes. Well, regular rubbing alcohol is about 91% alcohol, whereas alcohol inks are a much higher percent. I have a little, here I have this filled with just clear alcohol. And this is 99%. You can find this in the drugstore. You can pay a lot for it in the art supply store, or you can find it in the drugstore for a lot less. Sometimes you'll only be able to find 94%, get 99% if you can, because the other things, the other 9% or 6% or even 1% will not be your friend when it comes to having the pigment that's suspended in the alcohol moving around on the page. I'm just going to take a drink. Okay, so these are alcohol inks, a little set of them, and I brought some alcohol pens as well, alcohol ink pens. And then here are my watercolors. I think you can see them up there, yeah. When I do plein air watercolor painting, I have my paints in a little pan, like everybody else, and I take my pan out and I pre-filled it and I wet down my watercolors and paint. But when you're working with Yupo, you really need the full effect of the paint. So I always squeeze right out of the tube for my Yupo painting. And I put the paint on a plate or whatever, and I use that. I often don't do very much mixing of colors on my palette, but rather put the paint onto the Yupo and let the magic happen there. So very high quality watercolor paints. If you use student grade watercolors, there's not enough pigment in it. It's more the medium and the suspension. There's not enough pigment in it to really do the job on Yupo paper because you want an explosive appearance of color on your Yupo. Even if you're doing a subtle thing, that it's sitting on the top, the water evaporates, it's going to get a lot lighter and less intense. So having very high quality, the good stuff, the artist quality watercolors, not, nothing more than that is the way to go for sure. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Then I use India ink. I'll demo that today. And a very, very, very sophisticated tool, which is a twig that I found in my backyard. It's just perfect for dipping in the India ink and drying. It's perfect because I can't make it do what I want it to do. So it just is part of that process of just loosening up and freeing up. I've taught a lot of Yupo classes, and the idea that I approach it with is to just put away, your expectations, even though I sometimes do work that is pretty exacting. I don't know if you can see this. it's a nest and all these lines are drawn in and the eggs are there and it's very apparent what it is. That's kind of secondary work. So if you're trying to make these flowers exactly, do a realistic rendition of the coffee mug that's on your counter or your dog or whatever it is, it's going to be frustrating and disappointing. So my recommendation is if you try out Yupo to just go with the flow and go for beauty in what you see. So, okay, any questions so far? All right, any home questions? Yes. This is the medium weight. It's I think it was 90 pounds. You can get the really heavy kind. It's very expensive. And the price of all paper has gone up so much. It's unbelievable. I mean, a large sheet of Arches watercolor that used to be, I don't know, $7, $8, right? It's $20 now. It's unbelievable. I haven't bought any Yupo in a while, so I'm not sure, but it is gasp worthy how high the prices have gone on materials. I don't really understand it. Oh, brushes. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure. Yep. Okay. I don't have here because it's going to make it. I'm going to be sorry about that later. I'm just going to put this over here. Okay. So here is, how's that? Is that pretty good? What I used is a white acrylic ink with not a quill pen, but a nib pen. So, a pen with a nib, a fine nib, and then white calligrapher's ink, because it is hard to get things. Would it help if I held it up? Okay, all right. Yeah, so the idea of this piece is usually my artwork's pretty happy, but this was at a political time. It made me very, very worried. And I was worried about things being nibbled away, the things that we treasure being nibbled away. And so here's this group of eggs in a nest. And there, if you look closely, these white lines are little insectile arms with nippers at the end of them. So this is a dark piece for me. I don't usually go dark with my art. All right. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Barbara. Is that clear?
Yes, that's clear. Thank you.
So in doing this, I did the background first, and then I pulled out the eggs and the nest, and then I painted in the insectile arms and went around them with white acrylic calligrapher's ink. Yeah, that particular one. Thank you. This one, I have one more nest that I brought today. No, not that. This. So many switches. Yeah, that's good enough. This one is another nest, but a simpler one. It's just a background in these four, they could be hen's eggs sitting in the nest. Yeah. So these are pretty exacting ones and require a lot of follow-on work. And then yesterday morning, thinking about this class, I just had some tulips and daffodils, and I just did this one. And as you can see, it's very loose. And then at the end, I don't know, the flowers just were so excited that they're they're all over the place. So these little bits of lines happened as well. So this was just one sitting, you know, and the nest ones are several sessions long. You know, I really invest some time and effort into those. But Yupo is a great medium for both approaches to art. And there are more up here if you're interested in looking at other examples. Was there another question? Lauren, did you have a question? Okay. Well, if you're working large, having a heavier paper is going to be better because you don't really matte Yupo because it's, I mean, I could drip water on any one of those paintings and the paint would just come right off. Even now, some of those are a couple years old. It's not, the paint is not stuck to the paper. It's just sitting there. And so that's why I have them in plastic. And so if you matte them and there's any moisture in the air, there's going to be a problem. So when I frame these, well, this one actually is, I did matte because it's far away. Often what I'll do, you have to make sure that there's a good distance between the Yupo painting and the glass. And they sell these spacers. I mean, you can have your stuff professionally framed, and sometimes I do that, but also I frame my own work a lot of the time. And I got these, it's a rectangular little spacer, it comes in like a 6-foot long piece. Is anybody familiar with these? It's about a 1/4 inch square, 6 feet long. It's plastic, and you peel off the back. It's and you put it on the back of the glass, and it stands away from whatever the Yupo is sitting on. It's really clever, and you never see it. So if you're going to do Yupo and then frame it yourself, then that's a thing to think about, is how to make sure that the glass does not touch the painting. And you do have to cover it in glass, because otherwise, you know, on a steamy day, the paint will just run down. That would be bad. Did I talk about brushes? Bigger brushes than you think you want. You know, we always hear this from all of our teachers, right? Bigger brushes. So here it's really, really true. So I start most of my paintings with this, oh, that's wet, this big brush. And then this, I do what I do the branch, the nest, the twigs in the nest with is a brush like this. I don't know if you can see that. See that for that. That's as small as I get. But mostly it's these big ones. And I have this lovely Japanese brush I like to use in that kind of a way, you know. And then this mop brush. This is a good brush to use with Yupo. Just a big old floppy mop. Wet that and just fill it up with paint and have some fun with that. So this is fun. I mean, I'm sure I'll say the word fun over and over again. It's fun. Crayons. Crayons resist the paint. So you might want to, mostly I don't sketch before I paint in this kind of a way. But if I decide I want to, then I'll work with a crayon usually. Crayon or ink, you know, who knows, whatever. And if you sketch with a crayon, then when you paint the crayon, the wax rejects the paint, and you'll have the your remaining line will stay there. You really can't get rid of it. So choose your color, choose your crayon well. I don't use a white crayon because it's a little too stark. So I have this color, which now it's called apricot. When I was a little girl with my treasured box of crayons, it was called flesh, you know. You would paint the crayon the faces with this color. I find it's a little bit warm and kind of nice to use for Yupo. So I don't think there's anything else. I think it's time to begin. Sometimes I wear gloves. I brought gloves, but I'm not going to use them today. I thought that I would just, I don't know, try and do something like these flowers. Oh, I was going to ask if I could get a light on these. Is that possible? if you turn one of your lights on, I just want the vase to get a little bit transparent, if that's at all possible. Here you go. It could be like a concert, right? Everybody holds their, yay. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Oh, that's perfect. Okay, because I want to see some light and shadow. And I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to work on two sheets. First, I'm just going to do a loose kind of a Yupo thing. And then earlier today, I made this hot mess. And I just splashed around with color. And what I'll do is pull color out of this so you can see. Maybe we'll do the beginnings of a nest or something. We'll just pull some color out so you can see how easy it is. So with the nest, I pull color out and then I paint it back in the colors that I want. So we'll do that second. But to start, how am I doing for time? What time is it? Oh, good, 7:30, perfect. Okay. Good point. Okay, that's good because it'll give us some drying time. The one thing I did not bring is my hair dryer, which I often bring to demos. So this is going to be so extremely loose. I'll paint with a little bit less water. Okay, well, I promised big brush, so here we go. Get some paper towels. Sometimes I'll spray the whole sheet with water before I start. I'm not going to do that today because, you know, time is limited and I don't have time to wait for it. So just trying to figure out the mechanics of this, how best to organize. I think that works. So I have these guys, these purple magenta flowers that I don't know if you can smell them, but the scent of them is just rising toward me. It's gorgeous. So I'm going to get some of this yummy paint on my brush and just kind of make shapes that are reminiscent of this. Right? There you go, right? I mean, it just, I'm done. And there's another one peeking out over here, you know. And then there are there's this beautiful pale green, white, sort of kind of white hydrangea. This is watercolor, and it's a variety of brands. No, own straight watercolor. So I have M. Graham and Daniel Smith and what else have I got here? Winsor Newton Artist Colors. What Daniel Smith? I like the intensity of those. So for these guys, oh, there's another one of those lilies up here. It's kind of a hint of one over there. And then there's the hydrangeas here. I want to distinguish the color just a little bit. And I want to switch brushes. We'll use the Japanese brush. That's always fun. I'm doing what I said I don't do, which is to mix color in the pan. So much for that.
Would you rather watch it on that one?
Liar, liar.
What do you want to watch on this one?
So these guys, just gonna sketch them in as big kind of shapes. Now I just want you to see what happens if I touch this. Just runs right in, and that's okay with me, you know? That's all right. Freedom. And then there's some over here. Some more over here. Can you see that okay? Okay. And then there's this lovely bud over here. I'm just going to try to make that happen. A couple buds, we'll say, pretend there's buds here and here. And then I'm going to put this leaf in.
Reasons I
I'm just going to
cannot,
go crazy with this leaf
it's not letting you name yourself.
so that you can see it cross the other colors.
It's my name.
Right?
I'll not allow you to.
Excuse me, Denise Newman, please
Here.
mute yourself.
And one over here. So basically, I just get kind of the basics in place. And this is going to change over time. As the paint dries, it's going to move around. One of the challenges is that everything ends up being a mid-tone. You know, as you can see, I don't have any real darks in here. I almost always have to add my darks afterwards to make things kind of pop. I'm going to try and get this vase. That's one of the reasons I wanted a light on it. So I'm just going to use that scary color, phthalo blue, with a little ultramarine. Once again, breaking my rule. And we'll just get, I think I'll just go around these, and here's fingerprints. Okay. And go up here, and because this is glass, here, I'm just gonna, isn't that interesting, right? I'm getting a pigeon. I don't mind that really. I don't really like the cross line. Sometimes if you give it a scrub, get in there and tell it who's boss, you get a better result. There we go. I'm going to say, gee, you know, I'm not crazy. I think I went a little crazy with this line over here. It's a little too much. So loop, I can wipe out whatever I don't want. Just remove it. Now I am adding water to the mix. So I don't know if you can see it, but the water is pushing in. Pushing in, which is fine. And later on, I'm going to pull out some highlights on the glass to make it three-dimensional. And also, I'm going to add in some real darks. Let's see if I can get something kind of dark going in there. I'm going to put out a little sepia with my blues and see if I can mix a natural blackish color. I don't want brown, so not going to put down sepia by itself, but this is a really good dark color. And then there's, I can see the, you know, the water through the vase, and later on I'm going to pull some of that out. Also, the base looks kind of dark to me. So here. So this is our first try, the first pass at what we've got here. So now, normally I would let this dry for a while or run my hair dryer on it or something or other, but we don't have that luxury. So I'm going to take my very special tool and my India ink, and I'm going to do some drawing. And let's see what happens. So what happened to that leaf? There was a leaf in there. Apparently I brought the brown India ink, not the black. And you can see it, things happen with the watercolor. It's very wet, very wet. That's okay. Happy accidents, right? Yeah, straight Higgins India ink. Regular old Higgins India ink. I'm going to define that bud a little bit better. And that fugitive leaf getting away from me. And this guy back here, you can see how the color has faded out, right? And then for the hydrangea, what I might do to make them hydrangea E is just suggest not draw every little, what are those called, the little flowers on the hydrangea? Yeah, I guess petals, right? Put some calligraphic lines in here. They're not really lines because there's a lot of wet going on. You know, it starts to feel like hydrangea, doesn't it? It's fun, right? Yeah, it is exactly that. It's very, very satisfying. And as I sit with the painting, it becomes more and more meditative because, you know, I just kind of start thinking about what does this painting need to be more of itself. So I'm not going to do anything more with those. So wet, so wet. But I am going to try and pull out a few highlights in the vase just to get it to look like glass, right? Well, I did a series of nests. I must have done 15 nests, each one different from the other. And I got really sick of doing nests. So I haven't done a nesting in quite a while. I love to do flowers in the spring. In Yupo, flowers are very satisfying. Flowers and abstracts. And you can see, I mean, on the table, you can see I've done a bunch of flowers. So this past week, when the forsythia were all in bloom, you know, I did a bunch of, well, 3 paintings of forsythia with little, you know, little petals and things. And that, you know, that was kind of fun. So here, I think we can go like this. And sometimes it helps if the vase has a broken rim. You know, it starts to look like a vase. Then if I wanted to ground this by putting some kind of a shadowy thing underneath it, I'm seeing shadow coming from this angle. And I'm going to not touch this paint because I would like at this moment for the shadow to stay separate. You can really see that all the fingerprints that are in the way here. And then there's a lighter shadow that's over here that I might want to represent. And there's quite a dark shadow right underneath. I'm very close to the edge, so that would be hard to do without really messing up. So there. So, you know, it's a start, right? So then when this dries, and some of this is getting dry, I think I can do some. You know how this beautiful lily has white around the petals? So I might, working with a brush and paper towel, this one is kind of dry. I might try this and I might like it and I might not, just pulling some out. Right? To better represent what that lily looks like. And then right in the center of that, it's really quite white. So I might really scrub some out. And then I might decide, I don't like that so much. And I can go back in and do something else. This has these petals over here. Right, so you can just keep on going until you're satisfied that you've got something that you're happy with. Ta-da. Here, I would do the same here. Just pulling some of the white out. It's a tricky balance between wetting the brush and cleaning the brush. And on the hydrangea, see, the hydrangea have just gone to complete green. So there, I think that I would go in and start working to make some hydrangea-like shapes. And on, probably for days and days. I'll come back to it and say, oh, it's getting there. I really like what's happening right here, and that might be a good place to add a little bit of hydrangea feeling. So some other things that you can do while your paint is wet is add salt. You know how when you're watercoloring, you can add salt and you get that beautiful texture? That really works here, works beautifully here. Yeah. So I could sprinkle some salt if I want. I did bring salt. If I wanted to, I don't know, I'm gonna do something. Some of it's too dry. It might be. You know how, you have to get it at exactly the right point, right? Just gonna put some there, and then we'll see, just as a demo, we'll see what it looks like later on. Okay. So I'm gonna call this one done for the moment. Moving it is always an adventure, and it's running all over the place, as I knew that. So does anybody know this color, quinacridone sienna? So beautiful. Oh my goodness, I just got it. All right, so here is, I can move this now so people can see more easily. Thank you for the loan of these gorgeous flowers. It's so beautiful and fragrant. All right, so here's this thing I did earlier. Clearly, I paid no attention to anything. I just threw paint down and moved it around. Shifting the paper is a good thing when you're working on an abstract background. You put the paint down and then just drip it this way and that. It's very pleasing. I also put salt down so that you could see the effect of the salt. I don't know if you want to, I don't know if it'll mess up your recording, if you want to come up and see what happens when you rub the salt off. Or I don't know, I don't think you can see it in the video, but it's wet. When it's barely wet, you put the salt down, your watercolor, so then you let it dry. Now the one difference is on a watercolor, you can really rub that to get the salt off because the paint is in the paper. Here, the paint is sitting on top of the paper waiting for you to annoy it. So you have to very, very carefully take the salt off because otherwise every grain of salt will scrape the paint right off. And you might want that as an effect, but I don't typically want that as an effect. So I'm just very carefully, almost bit by bit, taking the salt off. And then you do get that lovely effect of the teeny weeny little white dot. So can you see that? Is it okay if I just slough this off to the side? We'll figure it out later. Yeah. That's what I did in my kitchen too. So, and we can do a little dancing, little soft shoe on the soft. All right, so that's the salt effect. Before we get going with pulling out the nest, I thought I would show you some alcohol ink stuff. So I'm going to wet a part of this sort of out of the way. This section over here, I really like it because it's kind of odd and veiny. But I'm just going to give it a spray. And you can see it just comes right back to life. You see the way that's the paint's moving around? And I can now tilt it. Right? It's a whole new day. So this is good and fun. And also, it's going to be very frustrating if there's a part of your painting that, you know, as I do, as everyone does, I fall in love with the parts of my painting and then I ruin them. So, so here, I'm just going to tilt this off so that I can get it to a point where the alcohol ink will kind of do its thing. I'm leaving it damp, but not sloppy wet. Okay, all right. So now I'm going to take something that will show up, hopefully. Okay. Oh, this color is called Mermaid. It's pretty. And I'm just going to drop one drop in. You see that going? Can you see it on there? Barely. It's not that great. So isn't that a treat, right? This is peach Bellini. Yeah, I know, honestly. All right, so you can do, you know, I mean, that's kind of a cool effect because the paint stays underneath. I don't know if you, well, you can sort of see what's happening. It's much more vivid on the paper, but, you know, it's kind of cool. And then do it where it's not wet. It doesn't really do very much. All right, so that's alcohol ink. Let's do some subtracting now. Good. Yes. I don't because it just goes, it gets so wild. And you have to have a brush reserved for the alcohol because alcohol and water do not mix. It's like, as you would with an oil paint, you wouldn't put a wet brush in your water wet brush in your oil paint.
Gwen,
And it can really gum up the brush. So for those reasons, I don't really use brushes. And also it doesn't, it's not like if you put down a stroke that it's going to stay there. It's going to go whoo in all directions. But you might
Yeah.
want to try it, you know? I mean, why not, right? It's just fun. I have some small brushes here. What if
Gwen,
I did that? I have like a rigger brush. Yeah, I'll use this color. Just gonna, now
Gwen,
we're experimenting together because I've never done this before,
when there are questions from the audience in
but
person,
there's nothing I like more than experimenting.
repeat the
So
question.
we're in a sort of kind of wet area. So it's interesting, isn't it? Can you see? Yeah, I could see using this to make, if I were doing an underwater scene, to make grasses in my underwater scene. Right? Sort of interesting. And then you might want some yellowish color. Just really show. But, the variations are infinite. So that's some of that. You can use the pattern on a paper towel to make a really cool pattern on your painting. I'm just going to wet this and put down, I think that's just about right. Paper towel, this is one of those quilted paper towels. So can you see the pattern that's made? Yep, it's kind of cool. So this was the alcohol ink on dry watercolor. I don't like it. You might feel differently, but it has a heaviness to it that I don't care for. No, you can't move that. That's right. Alcohol ink is permanent. India ink is permanent. The watercolor obviously is not. So someone asked if I did a painting and I really didn't like it, and I don't know about you, but that certainly happens to me. If I have not added any of the indelibles, I just stick it in my sink and start over. Yeah, just wash it right off and start over. Right. You don't have to make it, what do people say, a genuine turner, where you turn it over. Paint on the back. Have any of you seen the Turner show yet? It's wonderful. Did you love it? Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree. Right. So I'm just gonna take some stuff out of the center here as if I were going to make this into a nest painting. And I'm gonna start by figuring out, I think I would like maybe an egg like that kind of a shape. And another one here. And maybe another one here. I mean, they just come right up, right? And, an overlapping head like that. And then we won't have time for tonight, but what happened is I'm going to do some nest pieces. The very last thing I would do after the whole nest is built all around it is individually, I clean these really well, and then I would wet them and drop in watercolor to either speckle, or I might use a highly granulating watercolor so that it speckles as it dries, and then put in the dark shadows, drop in some dark where I want the shadows to be. And then, that's exactly what I did here. So they end up looking like that, very spherical. And then you get the really darks in between. And that you do with a dry brush, because you don't want it to leak anywhere. Right? So that is the whole process for doing it. Now, if I want to start building nest kind of pieces around, Usually it takes 2 or 3 swipes to get the paint off. So it's just a matter of cleaning the brush. And this is going to sound silly, but I try to think like a bird about weaving these pieces. Sometimes I'll just block them up. You know, how would I need to weave these pieces in order to get my nest to be a proper nest? And the pieces that I pick up on the ground, they're not all like swirls, they're sticks. So they kind of go like that, and then they have little ends on them that go in another direction. And you know, sometimes I'll use more and sometimes fewer twigs. And this is the part that for me is very meditative. I'll just, because, you know, I mean, it's one twig at a time. So, you know, I can only do this when I can spend some real time up in my studio. And I just, you know, I just make my nest. I'll make a nest. And I'm just going to do a few more of these so that you can see when I start adding the color back in, what happens. And you could decide that in this nest there, you know, there are some feathers just hanging around. I have to remember to be tidy and change my paper towel. Yes, I will. Yes. So the question is, when I go to the studio, is it possible to go for brief times like 10 minutes, or do I set aside 2 or 4 hours, you know, a significant chunk of time? So I'm lucky enough to have a studio in my house. So I have one of my daughters, I absconded with her room when she turned 40. So I thought that was probably okay. So, so that's my studio now, and I built it out as a studio. But even that said, I can't just go in there for 10 minutes. It just doesn't work for me because, you know, I mean, once I get set up, I'm in there for a while. And also, once I start on this process, I tend to get lost in space. So I typically spend 3 hours. 4 hours is pushing it for me. I get too tired because, you know, I'm no spring chicken anymore. But 3 hours is a good amount of time for me to be in there. So I just keep on going like this with however I move to add shapes to this. You know, and I think about, you know, I'll stand back and look at it and decide, that nest is going to fall apart if I don't shore it up on this side with some more twigs, etc. But you don't need to watch me making more and more and more lines. So here's the interesting part. When I'm all done doing this, it looks kind of sort of whited out, you know, and nothing like a nest really. So then I'll take some fabulous color like quinacridone sienna, and I'll start painting back into these twigs, right, that make up my nest. And of course, many different colors. So I pull the color out, and usually I pull out the color a lot more. So I'm working on a clean base to go back in. Here, I haven't really, but I'll put in all kinds of colors. And then, you know, if there are those feathers. quinacridone, beautiful quinacridone orange. So- yes, yep, yeah. There's a lot of, I'm sorry, thank you for reminding me. There's a lot of overlap with printmaking. There really is, because of the additive and subtractive kind of a process that it is. It's a good observation. Yes, I'm working very dry because if I have a wet brush, I won't get the feeling of the twigs at all. So then I'll, because twigs are not, they're not uniform and they're certainly not one color. I'll go in with maybe a darker color, and deal with the segments like that. And then I'll start thinking about building color behind the eggs because that's going to be in deep shadow. And this is very dry now. As I go along, there'll be spaces between the twigs that I want to get really dark, And this is really detailed work. I can't remember who asked me about the balance between working wild and crazy and working very detailed. And this is where I get to, use my obsession with just little bits. And obviously the eggs need to be egg shaped and not like marshmallows or whatever they look like now. 3 eggs and a marshmallow, right? And then in that dark area, I might pull out a little bit. And then really these eggs would not be so separate. So I'm pressing really hard now to get a sharp edge. And then, when I'm done with all of the twigging around, I would clean an egg. See, it already has some dimension, right? And then if we want to make it a blue egg, I think I can do this. I'd wet the egg. It's still pretty messy in there, sorry. Trying not to, just be too boring. And get some yummy, this is the wrong blue, I'd probably use cobalt, but you know what I mean. Drop some blue in here. It's quite puddly, so as this dries, it would spread out. And then maybe at the bottom, I want, to have some shadow-ish color. And that you can see as it starts to dry, it mixes itself right here on the sheet. I might want to highlight on my eggs, so I might just grab highlight, and on like that. So that's the process of, and when I want to work detail, that's what happens, you know. For an underwater scene, I've done underwater scenes where I will decide, oh, I want to put a fish in. So I'll have some sort of a fish here that I can pull out. And maybe can you see that? Okay. Maybe it's a koi fish. So I might have this koi fish might have some of those crazy blotches on it, you know. And it might also have just a hint of a line down its back, as fish do. And some little back eyes. I'd use a different brush, obviously, at this point. Bulgy eyes. You know, I mean, it's not much of a fish, I'm afraid, but you know, the opportunities are endless. I've done underwater scenes with fish swirling around in a background that kind of tends to swirl around. That was really a lot of fun. And then these nests and grasses and landscapes and nothing at all, just complete abstracts and on and on. Any other questions? I've shown you all my tricks, all the stuff I do. Yes. Yes. Everything's dry. I took the question is, thank you, the calligraphic ink on this painting, the very fine and very bright white lines. How does that happen? And it is acrylic calligrapher's ink. It's very opaque, and you know it settles out. You have to really shake it and mix it and mix it and shake it, and it comes in a jar like this, a little bit bigger, but it's called white acrylic ink, and that will write on top of this. Not many things will. The one thing with a pen, with a pen with a nib. These are alcohol ink markers. They also will write on here. But you know, it's an imperfect science. This is. These guys are expensive and they dry out quickly. I can't say that I recommend them. Sometimes I use them for initial sketching, you know, but I haven't. I want them to work, but they really have not been that successful. I don't. Maybe that's what I'm doing wrong. You don't have to shake them. No, they're just saturated. There's no ball in them. So I don't believe that it's a matter of shaking them. They are quite permanent and the colors are beautiful, but I haven't had that much luck. Some people enjoy them. I haven't had that much luck combining them. Soapy water. If you use soapy water, there's just water with a little dish soap in it. You can, it changes the way the paint appears to the surface. So you can treat a little area with soapy water and then the paint will adhere more. It won't float around so much. Yeah, but then, you know, I bet you could, sure, yeah. And then it would stay where you put it. Let's try. So we'll get some green on here. Actually, we'll get some, whatever this is, magenta kind of color, so it's different. Right? So it does tend to adhere differently and much better. Yeah. Mhm. Sure, yeah, definitely. So will I ever remember? Yeah, well, you did. The question is, do you ever cut up your work and then collage it into other things or with itself? And I do. The only thing is, it's so delicate and so vulnerable to moisture that it's not that useful. But I have used it to make bookmarks with just pen and ink drawings on it, because it's a sturdy material and you can just cut it up. You can make ornaments with it. I cut it up and made little holes and then just drawn with, you could use those alcohol ink pens or any pens, just pen and ink drawings or paintings and hang them wherever. Yeah, it's a very versatile material. It's just it's a whole world of fun waiting for you. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, the last 30 seconds I've managed to remember to say. The question is there anything that fixes the watercolor to the Yupo? I have sprayed it with fixative. I've tried hairspray, I've tried fixative. I don't know, it just seems to me that it affects the color. So if you had something that you didn't want to frame, you wanted it out in the open, absolutely go for it. You have to be very light, a very light hand, because otherwise it's just the paint's going to just act like it's been wet. So, but if you give it several very light coatings, sure, yeah, and it's fine. But if I were framing a piece that it felt to me like good work, I wouldn't do it. I guess that pastel artists often feel that way as well, that fixative just is not the way to go, but who knows? Any other questions? How are we doing for time? Do we run over? 8:33, wow. You're welcome. Sure.